Thank you, Jackie and Maya. Does everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So no, it's a pleasure having this conversation with you. I guess what I would like to do is three things. I'll tell you a little bit, how does the World Bank has embraced behavior science over the last few years, and tell you a little bit, how we work, and then I'll show you some concrete examples, of our work over the last 3 years or so. I will try not to go to too many details, but I chose examples to show you in a way the breadth and scope of the type of policy questions that our team has, is working on. And then, because as Maya said, this is a session also about thinking about design and how to, push the proliferation of behavior insight into public policy. I can share some of my own kind of lessons and thoughts in terms of both of, how to go about doing it, but also, what have we learned from our point of view over the last 3 years, myself and the team. I think it's, for the World Bank, it's fair to say people have used, have thought behaviorally for many years. This is not necessarily new, but what it was not, what hadn't happened was being a very, high level bureaucratic, in a way, institution, works in development, it was not only until the annual report a few years ago that kind of put the question in a way back to the institution, how should we be thinking about behavior stuff. So since I'm assuming you're all super experts on behavior science, I'm not going to try to kind of convince you, what it is and what it does, etc. But I will say that, in a way, a very simple way that has been really useful for us also to jumpstart the work more systematically was to organize behavior science into kind of the 2-3 buckets of decision making. And, so the report, in a way highlighted, one way or one framework of how to think about it, which was about automatic thinking and the whole idea around the heuristic space and how that, influences decision making. The social space, which kind of introduced more structurally the idea about norms and networks and interdependence, and then the third bucket was this idea of personal schemas or mental models and how we use this again to drive conclusions and to kind of analyze and translate, interpret the words, all of which make decisions. So in a way, a simple way for us to converse with our colleagues and our counterparts, was to have, a simple way of interpreting or explaining why this is important and show, specific examples of this and that, etc. Now, even before we started, and you also know that behavior science, has been around for decades, especially in the marketing space, and convincing us that the latest iPhone model is the best ever, etc. But we work in development, and I think that was something new, even in the last 5-10 years, with the introduction of some behavior units around the world. I think by far, we were the natural entity to think through the lens of behavior science in development. And when you work in development, there's some specific issues that create and present issues in terms of how to think about it. And I guess also summarizing them. One is this idea that you also know from some of the work from colleagues from Boston, like Sendil and others, related to the idea of scarcity, and the idea that poverty, inequality, conflict, add a specific, bandwidth issue to people's decision-making process. And this is the context that we work. We work with, beneficiaries that, have to think of all sorts of other things as opposed to kind of the beautiful policy design take up or, kind of interpreting material, etc. that, kind of different social programs try to and aim to do. So how do we integrate and think through that lens? The second is the actual policy makers. Like every other human, they have to make decisions just like all of us. And, we wanted to understand, how do those come into play in a concrete sense, and how does that help our thinking and our design thinking in terms of interventions? And what does that, translate into interventions and things that we can actually offer and do for policymakers to improve it. In the context of implementation, which I will say, this is actually probably true in any context, it's not just a developing context, but, it's one thing to have a beautiful design for the best conditional cash transfer program, but once you get to the ground and you start implementing, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong or can be challenged, and you have to, that you have overlooked, and your, nice design hasn't, thought through in terms of capacities, in terms of technology, in terms of systems in place, and that creates a lot of questions for thinking and thinking about the feasibility of different types of solutions that could come out of behavior science, and to what extent there's either capacity or the ability for us to do these things. So we wanted to, in a way, we not only kind of actively, but by default, we had to try to think through these lenses and how to integrate that. So we about 3-4 years ago, we started in a way this adventure. And we proposed to, upper management to, see whether there was, appetite, interest, and demand to do behavior science, that they were buying in a more systematic way. So we formed a small team, and basically we've been trying to form a business model of how that could work. But there's 3 types of things that was clear from the beginning that we could do. And as we started working with teams, we realized that, we needed to help them kind of through this journey of, how does it look to integrate behavior science in somebody's project? As a context, our team has about 15,000 colleagues that work in about 200 countries, spending, on a given time, $40–50 billion in projects and technical assistance, etc., across every imaginable sector. So we wanted to see how can we can leverage that and get our hands kind of into the policy kind of a space and be useful behaviorally. So we do, in a way, the way we approach any project is to do 3 things. One is, and again, I'm sure this is all not news for you, but what we find is that helping teams come up with a clear behavioral problem definition actually takes more time than any of us would have imagined. And partly that's, even behavior, I would say this is an element of how, policy making is happening. People trying to solve, the high level problems, and, they talk about the nutrition, better nutrition for kids, better school outcomes. But it's not often that they have a discussion, okay, what are type of specific behaviors you want for the different actors in the system, etc. So as we started having this conversation, it became clear that we needed to invest a lot to help people refine, good, solid question in terms of value added and in terms of actually potential impact, high, kind of finding the right questions to potentially lead kind of the high impact in terms of interventions. And then, once we have that, then we use different approaches, quantitative and qualitative, and different, kind of data collection, a lot of, qualitative field work, and all sorts of approaches that we can to understand kind of user experiences in a given setting. And of course that, starts giving rise to kind of potential areas where bottlenecks exist in the system, and then that gives us to lots of kind of the ideation space, where we can also, when we approach teams, we can also offer our help in implementing and evaluating and then iterating with the counterparts. We work directly with teams in the World Bank who lead specific projects in education, in health, in infrastructure, etc. We also work directly with governments when there's a demand for that, and therefore and we also work with bilateral and other organizations to also share kind of our insights and also partner to bring scale to some of the things that we do. So in some kind of very loose way, if you think of us as a as a business unit, we kind of have three services. It's like let's brainstorm and hear your issues, and we give you some directions, and then kind of the team can use that and go from there and do whatever that they feel it makes sense. Most of the times we do a lot of this space of actually ourselves doing these diagnostics and the ideation of solutions that potentially could happen, and usually also we get involved into the design of interventions and the evaluation and I guess as I'm going through, I mean I guess it's not obvious, but I'll emphasize that part of the success, I think, and kind of an early lesson for us has been that especially introducing what seems to be like a new approach to solving policy problems in developing settings. Evidence was always an instrumental aspect that we wanted to make sure we have. So we for the most part, everything that we have tried to do in terms of solutions, we have always tried to think of causal ways to make sure we understand the impact of whatever intervention we did. And again, this exactly kind of the approach we take will be very context and project specific. But that also allowed us to share and do an outreach, and also showcase the value added, especially of a new in quotes area where still a lot of the norm and the skeptics of the value added was a few years ago still up in the air in terms of what this approach would bring potentially. So imagine so I'll go briefly to. So I won't spend too much time on some of the details, but I can always come back if anybody wants to. But so the type of behavior mapping that we would do is, if you want to ask, if your behavior problem is help somebody to add chlorine to water, because this is kind of the, it's a setting where water, there's no clean water, etc. So we would then basically try to break down all the steps and all the potential, the user journey that has to happen to, get water, get chlorine, get, kind of put the two things together at the right time in the right quantities, etc. And as you do this, you can start thinking about, potentially, again, both from the research that happens, kind of dev, field data, etc. We can start thinking about the potential things that could break down a specific decision node or action node. And again, I'm not going to go through this, but you can see a lot of ideas can come out, and all those ideas, our job in a way is to synthesize into both which of these seem to be more important in terms of breaking kind of this journey, which of these kind of are feasible in terms of we have some solutions for them given the current system, and eventually once we have those, how do we prioritize them with the counterparts, in a very practical way, and how many of those we can actually do some clever thinking in terms of designing a solution that we can also evaluate and learn. but ultimately, and I'll repeat that later. What people appreciate of behavior science is actually the solutions, and the fact that in public policy, it's not about the 20-year paper that shows you a miracle, but it's about today and the next 3 months, can I do something active, and how do I do it? It's fair to say that in our work, we were somewhere in the middle, and I think it's a point I'll make at the end. A lot of when we started this, a lot of the buzz around, and maybe it still is, and maybe we can discuss this a little bit later. Behavior science in the mainstream, or at least as it was perceived in the mainstream, was always being pitched as the very, the nudge world, the quick, low cost, type of space for solutions. I think, as I'm, showed you very kind of briefly, for us, because we came from the poverty space specifically, in the scarcity space, and the more psychologically, the boundary kind of constraint, I think, we always came back from slightly different way of thinking about it, and this idea, which I'm going to show some examples of how we want to think through policy lens about norms and about mental models more proactively and more specifically in our work, was always clear from the beginning. And because also as we were doing that, we also realized that a lot of the things we did were about actually changing the mindset and the mental models of our colleagues and our counterparts. And I think that's where a lot of the value added came from the behavior work. Was not actually, kind of the 3 months, 5 percentage point increase in, an outcome of interest, but it was also helping our counterparts see a process of thinking, of solving kind of their all sorts of problems in a slightly, in a new way. That actually led them to many more ideas. So I'll come back to that later. But what I want to do now, maybe for about 20 minutes, is to rush through, as many examples as I can and show you kind of the range of work that we do. And clearly, since I talked about nudging and framing and, quick things and low-cost things, yes, we do a lot of communication work in different spaces. So this is a behavior map of some of our work we've done in Central America in different settings. This one is from Mexico, and it's basically, the problem is there's a lot of forest landscape, deforestation or reducing deforestation projects. There's a lot of subsidies, but women do not apply for those problems. So the team, did a nice way of thinking through, kind of different, ways of to map out the thinking around that and the reasons why potentially, women would not be interested about that. And what they found, they found a lot of issues around, motivation, aspirations, connecting, something to something kind of more that they could feel, belonging to. So a lot of concepts, but basically just to show you kind of from the diagnostics, this was the traditional, kind of a control, if you want, kind of the old way of announcing, come apply to get a subsidy, lots of pictures of, women and, but it was, as you see, I mean, this is done, it's a very World Bankish, sterile, boring, kind of a high level talk about, what you need to do to apply to get some of this funding. The team came up with posters like this that basically, again, I won't go to too much details, but, kind of a connect to behavioral concepts like simplifying the message, creating some more proactive, call to do things, invoking social norms, creating some sort of identity, etc. And when we tested these posters in communities, they actually led to 18 times more applications compared to the previous slide. So again, simple, reorganization of kind of communication can have, quite extensive impact in terms of drawing, women in this case to apply things. Similarly, in the space of waste management and recycling in Argentina, we were working with a municipality to basically reduce waste and increase sorting of trash in homes. We worked literally with the municipality, where it gave us access to literally the trash cans, in terms of kind of working through a design to help us understand whether different messaging and kind of reminders of a way for in households could lead to improvement. So more or less, kind of on the left, you see the communication, that letter that was sent to households, that again kind of touches on different aspects of behavior, kind of a framing and nudges in a way. So and on the right, you see a calendar that was given as a gift, that was a magnet that would be put on the refrigerator, would basically remind people that every Thursday is when you can actually separate your trash into the recycle and put it on the curbside for the trucks to pick it up. And we have variations of different sort of messages about kind of in this calendar, and you can see kind of literally kind of the check, the check that they could do every Thursday to kind of confirm that they did it, etc. Again, simple intervention, and what did we find in this case? Separation rates basically doubled just by doing this very simple kind of intervention at a very low cost of 30 cents to kind of do the calendar and the modification of those letters. And if I'm not mistaken, the team right now, one interesting thing, and one question that always comes in these presentations is about long-term effects. And I think we've been kind of trying to study that, and we have monthly data, I think, over the last year or so, and we're trying to kind of analyze it. And this is kind of kind of an infamous example in taxation that has been, proliferated in many other settings. And this is an example, one of our latest examples from Indonesia, where again the team sent. So this is an intervention with almost 24,000 small medium enterprises, and this is the taxes they pay monthly, kind of a revenue tax that they have to pay at the end of each month. So we wanted to see if firms can pay faster on time, and they can actually, or more firms can get into. And again, different communication letters were sent, including a calendar that reminded people, how simple the process, or help people find the online process to pay taxes on time, etc. And you can see, roughly there's a 10–15% increase in payment, in amounts paid, especially for the two of the three types of frames or variations that had led to kind of more simplified information, or just invoking kind of public goods use of the money, of the taxes. Interestingly, unlike other settings where we find that deterrence framing, which is the idea that I'm telling you, Jackie, I know you didn't pay, maybe you forgot, but with this letter, I know that you're doing it an active kind of you're doing it in an active way. That didn't actually have an impact in the case of Indonesia. I remember in Poland, for example, it helped much more than kind of other social type of norming. So I guess an insight there also for us is that, what works it's also the reason why we want to do this experiment and learn from it, because each context has its own specificities, and I think that's important. And so in the case of Indonesia, we're also been tracking monthly what's going on with taxes, and there seems to be a continuation, kind of of the payment rates, even like almost a year later after kind of or a few months after the interventions kind of ended, which I think in our case this is like, it's the last part of the graph that you see there. And very quickly, an example again on communication from Cape Town, which is about water savings. I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, huge drought leading, depleting the water sources of Cape Town. There was even a counter that was saying, you know, there were like 3 more days type of things. I mean, I think it came to around 100 days or maybe 50 days. But Sam from our team was, you know, actually helping the municipality there, and in the bills, the monthly bills that household received, there were various framing tested, but, you know, just quickly to say on the left, you have a framing that appealed much more to poorest household because it was about saving. It was a savings framing. You know, you use less water, you're going to save more money. Whereas on the right one, you see a framing which is more about status recognition or even shaming, and basically that actually led to, you know, so if you save more water, you know, it will call you a great citizen and put your name on kind of a website, etc. So show us you're the best. So help us save. And that actually also, you know, appeal much more to wealthier households. And I think in our context, in developing context, it's also important for us to understand the distributional impacts and how behavior science can be used to address, you know, kind of a from a well-being and a kind of a you know, kind of a design point of view, and even from an impact point of view, how the behavior aspect can address this. Again, just, you know, this thing, you know, a couple of years later, some persistent impacts, and kind of these levels of water savings kind of equivalent to a 15% kind of a price increase, which quite impressive given how, you know, minimal the cost was. So that was kind of the, you know, the communication, you know, kind of a nudging in the sense of, you know, framing space. The second space, again, following a little bit kind of the decision-making kind of a outline I gave in the beginning, was, you know, can we work in a much more, you know, complicated settings or questions, and can we actually help in terms of this space of mental models and beliefs space, and how does that look, and how do we actually do it in practice? So I'll show you a couple of examples. So we've done a lot of work on youth employment, and this is the typical, you know, journey of somebody, you know, trying to find work. And again, you know, what I think we found, you know, there is, you know, there's 2-3 buckets, but certainly the first steps tend to be huge bottlenecks for a lot of youth, in the sense that the whole idea of, you know, getting a job, you know, requires some level of aspiration, goals, and self-motivation. And we found in various settings, and it always, you know, it comes across that, you know, that's something that, you know, is not taught at school. There's not a lot of guidance. People, you know, don't know a lot how to think through, you know, what exactly to think. So, you know, expectations may be way off kind of reality. And that leads to lots of, you know, disengagement. And even, you know, so without going through the other things, which is more about, you know, kind of getting into the search and, you know, accepting rejections and persevering, and, you know, the costs related to job search, CVs and this and that, you know, those are also important. But as we were working and finding different countries and projects to work, you know, I think it's fair to say a lot of our diagnostics were pointing to these first kind of types of things. So we did a few, you know, we have a few interventions where kind of roughly, you know, they're going to change in different settings, but like, for example, in Ethiopia, we work with an NGO because the job center space in Ethiopia is not as feasible or practical for us to scale something. But basically, we offered, you know, training that basically touched on these kind of concepts, the self-affirmation and goal setting. And what we found is that, you know, kind of it actually increased the job search intensity, especially for men, and potentially some encouraging impact in terms of employment outcomes, especially those who, you know, at the, you know, kind of we started from a much lower kind of a, you know, low locus of control kind of base. Similarly, a much larger intervention led by Ana Maria from our team in Turkey and working directly with the job centers and piggybacking on their training kind of space and capacity space that offers different services to unemployed, found a range in different outcomes, a range of positive results, anything from kind of survey, again, kind of adding on some content in the trainings that has to do with some of these concepts of goal setting and aspirations, etc., led to you can see there in parentheses some of the percentage point changes in different outcomes. Active job searching up 22 percentage points, both in terms of intensity and the where people are looking. A significant increase in take up of other H2 services, etc. So again, these are relatively low cost things, and if Anna Maria is connected here, she can tell you how easy it was. Okay, maybe it was not it, but how we can talk later about the complexity of setting some of this intervention in the different contexts. But again, in the high level thing, kind of working with our social protection team, was very useful in terms of bringing kind of these insights and applying them into a large setting and changing, attitudes of youth and people looking for work. We've done a lot of work in the education space, and we've done work both for teachers and students. I'll show you very quickly. So some of the work we've done in Peru, South Africa, Indonesia, Macedonia, and others has to do with trying to see if we can help address self-beliefs and beliefs about learning for students. A lot of the literature, or at least we came from part of the literature that addresses that, especially more marginalized groups tend to, come from contexts where they're learning, the philosophy about how one learns has nothing to do with, ability, effort, motivation, but it is given as more of a, you have it or you don't. So that kind of led us in a natural way to some of these theories from Carol Dweck on growth mindset, some of the work that Angela Duckworth is doing on grid. And basically we came in different settings, and again here the picture shows you, an intervention that basically focuses on introducing the concept of growth mindset, which is this idea that your brain is a muscle, and this is what you do with muscles to make them to grow them, exercise them, keep them healthy, keep them growing, etc. So it was a mixture of giving the neuroscience in an age appropriate way to give some direction, some tools about how to what does it mean to exercise my brain, and introduce things around feedback, getting feedback, failing, challenges, etc. in a very simple way. Depending on the country, this range from a 1 or 2 hour session to a longer session. Sometimes we did it through cartoons like you see here, and kind of cartoon stories. Sometimes it was a more nerdish text for age appropriate. Usually we've done it for middle school age kids, I think, for the most part. And then in some places, we've done it through videos. And I think what we find, and again, I won't go too much through that, but what's interesting, we found in most cases consistent evidence that it doesn't work for everybody. So it kind of our average effects are 5 to 10% of standard deviation. But when you look at heterogeneous effects, they tend to really affect some of the more marginalized groups, where some of the effects are as high as catching up with 3-4 months in terms of test performance in language or math. So quite really compelling effects. Again, one lesson from us here is to think about targeting and personalization of these interventions, or whether universal interventions are given to everybody, even that maybe not everybody may benefit on the test dimension at least. It brings up those discussions in a way, and it's also kind of as a side example just to share that kind of a couple of weeks ago, as Peru, which was one of the earliest countries that we did this work, they actually used some of our videos to broadcast on the national TV as part of their kind of online TV version of learning, of national learning. So this work has been in a way scaled up at the whole country for 12, 13-year-olds curriculum. One question that comes here again is, okay, is how much this type of work is sustainable? And I think that's a fair question. In the case of Peru, we actually did an intervention. We did evaluate a year later whether some of these effects that we were finding were sustained, and impressively, we actually found the same levels of impact being sustained over time, and even some of them, especially in language, even showed some way an increasing return. Which kind of led us to some hypotheses that we'll need to test more, but kind of this idea around learning and learning and kind of translating learning into impacts may take time, and in some ways what the results are suggesting is that some of these students, through repeated successful experience, slowly kind of yes, they had this one shot of 1 or 2 hours exposure to something like growth mindset, but through their learning experience, through potentially feedback from teachers, maybe that gets them to a repeated, habit of learning from these experiences and changing kind of mindsets over time, which then lead to even more effort, etc. So that's something, I think that consistent with kind of the findings, but I think we would really need to replicate some of these results to other studies. And the last example, quickly to show, we have some work. This is an example of diagnostics work where we have, this is work from Philippines that actually did a survey about health practitioners around stunting. And there was an interesting correlation that came up when if you do kind of clustering of some of the words being used to discuss why stunting exists in the world. On the left, you find a very concrete group of practitioners that talk a lot about genetics and it's top down. It happens because it happens, and there's not much in a way that we could do to change things. Where on the right, it basically explained a lot of the symptoms and a lot of the correlate of why stunting is because it's because of bad nutrition. It's about it's about poor access to health. It's about poverty. It's about inadequate food, etc. And what's interesting in this setting is that we found a correlation where practitioners that believe there's nothing to do tend to actually have at least some indicators of their interaction with kids and the families tend to actually suggest they actually don't put as much effort, and the kind of quality is worse. The quality of care is worse relative to the group on the right. So for us, it's an interesting, then an important in a way diagnostic to think through, kind of the heterogeneous, quality of care as a function of mental models, and how that can then lead us either to think about trainings and capacity for, the practitioners, or at least how to understand, how to think about policies that can address quality of care beyond, kind of other kind of the most typical kind of issues that one can think. So the last bucket of examples is around this idea about social norms, and I'm framing it from a kind of a larger space of social contact theory, which is basically in some ways any aspect of social norms and how understanding how we interact with each other. One way or another is about communication, either direct communication with others, so literally putting us in a room to hang out so we can see each other's perspective, or interventions that push us to think of the other's perspective or give us information about the other perspective. So, so I'm gonna, kind of probably incorrectly call all of these kind of under a bucket of social context. But here, so here there's different things that can be done. Anything from the soap opera edutainment space. This is work from our colleagues in BIND, which is the impact evaluation team, and they have worked with MTV over the last few years. And this is an example of a show that portrays, in this case, the guy on the red circle is a youth playing in a soccer team. He has HIV. He doesn't want to share it because of stigma, this and that. But basically, the story through the narrative, we introduce, good behaviors around more monogamous relationships, about testing, and about healthier behaviors. And what they were able to find through kind of evaluation over the last few years, they actually associated causally through doubling rates of HIV testing, having concurrent sexual partnerships, having STIs for women, and through kind of all sorts of social media and kind of expansion of the series in other countries. This started in Nigeria, I think. They were able to reach an incredible, $250 million, at least, kind of expose people to kind of this type of intervention. So I think this is a very fruitful space. In our own work, we do a lot of work lately on the space of post-conflict and cohesion. And this is kind of a summary of our diagnostics in Lebanon, where we were asked, this is work we've been doing, also supporting GIZ, the German aid agency, to help them think through their operations as well as kind of the bank's operations, and think a little bit, okay, how do we address the influx of refugees, the economic aspects, the crisis that's going on, but think of it through different groups in the society, and how do then use that as an insight to come up with interventions. So clearly the last few months in Lebanon have been really tough. So this is in a way but here you can kind of clearly see for each of these groups we created, there is a long list of behavior, attitudes, aspirations, perceptions of how society sees them, perceptions of how the family sees them, and we kind of managed to untangle different types of bottlenecks and ideas that eventually could lead us to start thinking around different areas of support, including anything from jobs to access to services to more kind of capacity training, etc. And I think what we are been trying to do now is to kind of shape this into concrete kind of interventions. One thing that at least I get excited is this idea of finding spaces for people to reflect. And virtual reality is one such space. There's other spaces, but virtual reality makes impossible things to be true. Like this example that comes from Stanford, where basically it's an experiment where you either show somebody text more or less that says that savings is good for you, and therefore start saving for the future, whereas an experimental group that creates an avatar of them, and they look at kind of a little example on the right. You basically see your old self, 20, 30 years older, and you're basically asked to create empathy for your old self, and remember that you really love your old self and you want to take care of him. And kind of the experiment suggested that people that do that not only had larger empathy about themselves, but that translated to breaking kind of present bias and leading them to almost like a doubling in kind of a potential allocation towards kind of a future savings. So I think this is kind of a space for us that we're trying to explore, and it's kind of it's a nascent space in terms of policy world. But this is an example. We're hoping, COVID pushed this a little bit back, but we were in the process before COVID with to start implementing an intervention in Turkish schools aimed at training for teachers. And basically the idea was to expose them to different scenarios, classroom scenarios. So people put a headset and you're in a classroom and you're exposed to interactions between Syrian and Turkish refugees with teachers, and somehow leads them to take a perspective and understand, what it is to be a Syrian kid in a classroom that has, more Turkish kids or more Syrian kids, and try to hopefully shape a little bit the understanding and empathy and attitudes, and how to help teachers with, kind of ideas beyond just empathy, tools to, in a way, manage kind of class dynamics, etc. Because we think we're cute, we did an intervention, proof of concept in the World Bank. We took advantage of one of our retreats of our big department, and we asked some colleagues to basically use a nice virtual reality application where you actually talk to yourself, but first you embody yourself into somebody else. So we wanted to, in this case, we chose Barack Obama for men and Michelle Obama for women. And the idea was we asked people, depending on, we asked people to either think about whether they could brainstorm with Obama about coming up with a better work-life balance ideas for the World Bank and for them. And another group, we asked them whether they could brainstorm around ideas of how to think about gender issues into their actual work. And the point here is that what's kind of the theory here, and what's kind of the earliest evidence, what we found is that, when you, we all think, we cannot think in a way in our own bodies. But once you brainstorm, in a way, this is kind of the idea of brainstorming. Like brainstorming, especially brainstorming with a credible agent that you trust or respect or you look up to, potentially can kind of open up your space. And in this kind of variation, half of the time you're yourself and you talk to Obama, and the other half you become Obama and you talk back to yourself. So your perspective changes into this experience. I know it sounds bizarre, and I won't go too long into explaining it, but kind of the idea is that getting out of your body and looking at yourself actually creates more space for you to be open for ideas. And what we found is that again, it was a very proof of concept, so I don't want to exaggerate the results, but I think it's fair to say we found more willingness for people to commit, to keep, thinking around the issues we posed to them. And we did have some question whether, people did come up with ideas, and I think about half of the people suggested they actually came with, new ideas during this experience. So I guess this kind of social contact, the point is that the social contact is something that has to do with, not only with others, but even yourself in terms of mental models. So the last couple of examples is to push this further into some of our work that tries to get into more, kind of policy space. In Cyprus, we work on a few spaces, but it all has to do around the peace process. And one of the bottlenecks there is about how do you help Turkish and Greek Cypriots interact more. So this is kind of the front page of a platform we created, a civic engagement platform where people can go and they can share ideas about, different things that are being asked of them to come up. So it's a mediation forum, but what's nice about this forum is that it comes in, you register, and it comes, in the case of Cyprus, in 3 languages. So it solves the language space, which is big in Cyprus. So people can write in Greek, Turkish, or English, and see everything in their language. So there's no need for, so people see, everything from every user. That allows more interaction between the different groups. But also the ideas that come up, it's a little bit like a Facebook where you can like ideas and you can support ideas. And eventually the top ideas go into public voting. So actually people can choose themselves. So which idea needs to materialize. So it gives both empowerment and voice to citizens. It lets them interact and see that the different groups have similar issues and similar dreams like I do, and it also things materialize. So something really actually happens. So it kind of connects this, between just having a dream to actually see really something happening through kind of very transparent, kind of voting processes. And what we found in an evaluation we did is that we indeed found impressively after like the first campaign, which took 3 months, we found, compelling evidence, causal evidence that trust between the two communities was actually improved, especially between like Greek and Turkish Cypriots. So that's kind of another space for us that we're exploring in terms of attitudes. And this is just, it's just too beautiful of a graph, so I just wanted to show it. But we are doing some exploration with lots of caveats and moral questions on our end, whether this makes sense for us to go into. But the question is, social media happens. You all know Cambridge Analytica, etc. But is there something useful and that kind of value added for policy dialogue? And at least descriptively, I think there is a lot to learn from, especially in this world of polarization. And this is a nice example where you see there, every dot is a user, and you see these clusters that are basically derived through network analysis. And here you have an Indian cluster that, for the most part, attracts a third of all the tweets related to the Rohingya issues, and it's kind of a negative, kind of an anti-Rohingya, if you want, kind of a sentiment. Whereas you have the positive, all these other, there's 4 or 5 other clusters there on the right, but two things, they tend to be neutral or positive, but they're really far away from the other one. So there's not a lot of interaction between kind of these 2 families of clusters. So at least descriptively, it can help you, understand, kind of the political economy of these conversations. On the other end, it puts some questions for us, can we do something about it, or how should policy makers kind of think through that? How do you facilitate more contact? I mean, I think, and the premise here is that we don't want people to change views, but we should be able to encourage, constructive discussion and dialogue across groups, because again, social contact theory suggests there would always be overlapping common goals to start building, more kind of synergies and reduce or improve social cohesion outcomes. So it's a big question for us. If you guys have feedback, reactions on this is welcome. And the last point is that, a lot of the work we do is actually also on institutionalized behavior science in government, where we actually work directly with governments to build capacity, etc. This is a picture from Turkey. Okay, so quickly on kind of the lessons. So if I were to think about, okay, after like 3-4 years, how did we learn? So one thing, literally just off the press, we have this volume that came out that actually overviews 10 examples around behavior science, and we have a second volume that looked at international organizations. So I would also point you to those to help think through some of the lessons from other countries. But I think one thing is fair to say, just like we thought we want to focus on developing the poverty space, etc. I think, if you were to kind of push behavior agenda, it's important to have a vision as to what are you trying to accomplish, kind of put it down more in the more concrete sense. it's essential to have skills and find the right interdisciplinary team to do that and find the related partners. I think it's essential to start, like in our case, we start with, in a way, talk to our colleagues that were kind of early adopters, more open to try things with us through their projects, find areas where potentially could find quick results. Those are the low-hanging fruits. And slowly, kind of have focus and strategy into, how do we want to go about focus in terms of which areas make sense and how to kind of go from there. Evidence is really crucial, showing, causally that this works and how it works, and the cost-benefit analysis is important. Sharing the results is as important as anything else, especially in the context of skepticism of policymakers who have too many other important things that, worry around, Renos wanting to teach behavior science as an amazing thing. I also feel it's a tool where it has actually helped between communicating evidence and the value added. It also changed the mindset of kind of our colleagues and our counterparts. We cannot do, we're a small team, we're a 10 full-time staff, and we have about 10 more other people, kind of on longer contracts, etc. But, we need partnerships to do this. We cannot do this alone. Neither we want to grow. We want to have enable others to do it. So it's important to do that. Also, it enables scale, which is something that, we really aspire to. This doesn't happen overnight, so, it has to be patient. And what I found, having a startup excuse that, we're new and we're proof of concept allowed us to fail a lot and learn, allowed us to try different models, allowed us to, not have the pressure of, we need to deliver everything in one, coherent way, but allowed us the time to do it. But ultimately, it's about adding value and coming up with solutions. So, if you don't have a real solution to a real problem, then this doesn't make a lot of sense. So my last slide, it's about kind of general what we learn about behavior science in development. And I think I want to, I think I talked about this, I guess, as I go soon, but diagnostics really it's important because unlike economic thinking and, the external validity, life is all about context. And so we need to understand context, especially for behavior science. I think evidence is clear why we need it. I think a lot of the scale comes from building from existing things as opposed to us coming up with completely new ideas. Not always, but most times it helps. I think it's fair to say, behavior science is not just about nudging, and it's actually about answering the big question. And I think one of the most exciting areas that, we're trying to kind of be more, active about is about policymakers. A lot of behavior science is about beneficiaries, one way or another, consumers, etc. But I think especially in our context of development, I think the biggest return has to be addressing policymakers and their decision-making process. So we're trying to get into that space. I think I went a little bit over than I expected, but you can blame me for that. Anyway, Jackie, back to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Renos, for that extremely interesting overview of your work. We are a couple minutes over, but perhaps for those of us that can hang on for a minute and just take one question. There's some people that are interested in working in this space, and they're wondering how should they think about this balance between behavioral science skills and experience in the development context. Who do you find tends to be successful in applying these behavioral science concepts to the work?
It's a really good question. I mean, I would say when we started, it's fair to say none of the team was a true behavior science in the sense that most of us would understand. My background is not behavior science. I'm an economist. I applied it, I did development economics, a lot of micro applied stuff. But in my work at the World Bank, I studied poverty and psychology came in most of my projects. So it's not that, I was starting from scratch, and that's what I meant earlier, that, a lot of the work, at least in the World Bank, we have to deal with bandwidth and scarcity. We have to deal with aspiration. You know, we haven't studied, and not everybody has looked at it from this angle, and this is what we try to kind of put more prominence to it. But it's fair to say, as our team has evolved, it's definitely, you know, our last hires have been very proactively to get, you know, psychologists and people that actually can bring kind of deeper, you know, thinking into the process. In some ways, our team is an applied team. We're not about academic research. We don't, you know, we want to find solutions that scale, that are context-driven, et cetera. So you need people that understand the word. You need people that understand, you know, kind of the thought process of, you know, kind of diagnostics, but that can come from many different disciplines. And I think that's what's exciting in a way from this space, is that I don't think, you know, I think all of you probably can be behavioralists, and you are behavioralists even as we speak. And I think what we've tried to do is to, and we're still doing, is to put some sort of system or method in a more, you know, translated in a way that makes sense in our context, which is this development, you know, public policy context, which is not as, you know, it's not as scientific as one would hope, and that's why what I mean, it's context. It's the king of behavior science in some ways, but I would encourage anybody who's interested in this, and I mean, my team, you can reach out, I can connect you to somebody who came from a very weird background and is doing amazing work in our team. So.
Wonderful. With that, Renos, we're going to close. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to all of our attendees. The recording will be available on our Twitter, so make sure you follow us at Harvard BIG. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.